Awesome. What's the thing? Top 4. Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be pretty awesome. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. We're in Genesis again. We're on the Wrestler Part 2, and so we've been talking through some things, and it's going to be important for us to remember back. If you haven't been a part of what we're doing, we had this conversation. We started at the beginning. We began to see the nature of God, and what was, when we talk about the creation stories, what was the command that God gave? When we talk about the creation stories from Genesis 1, it was resting. Yes, but he gave a command to Adam and Eve on day 6. And he gave the same command to Noah. Do you have words? Yes. Be fruitful and multiply. When we saw that, what did we see afterwards? What happened after? What's the story that comes right after God resting? He told the people to be fruitful and multiply. What comes right after that? What's the story that comes right after that? The fall of man. Right? Then we see the same command happens. Noah comes off the ark. God makes a covenant. It's going to be a covenant between me and you. Covenant. It's going to be a covenant. It's going to be between me and you. It'll be for you and all your people. It's going to be a covenant between me and you. And he says, be fruitful and multiply. Then what happens? Well, it's not circumcision. He's missing a part. There's a tragedy ensues. He becomes a eunuch. Yeah. And then we get into this. Story of Abraham and Isaac, and we've been down through the lineage, and we started in Genesis 25. We really saw this connection. Now Jacob is who we're on now. He's the son of Isaac. We often try to just overlook and push Jacob to the side because he's a usurper. He's a liar. He's a scoundrel in a lot of ways. He is dishonest, and he is very self-focused, but he is relentless in his pursuit of more. He wants more. This is something that God can use, this pursuit of more. It's not only something God can use, but he can redirect and he can bless. Because Jacob, the first introduction we get to Jacob and Esau, we see Jacob wanted what? He wanted the birthright. He got it through a bowl of soup. A bowl of stew, a lentil stew. Esau sold his birthright. And then he wasn't just satisfied with the birthright. His mother was convinced, and she sought out God, and God told her what? That the older brother would serve the younger brother. And in order to accomplish that, the blessing that was prepared by Isaac had to go to the younger son. And so he pursues after it. You know what happens after you make your brother mad from stealing his birthright, or making him, cheating him out of his birthright, and then cheating him out of the blessing that Dad had prepared for him? You go on the run. You're running away, and you find yourself in the house of Laban, who's your uncle, which is really your cousin. It's kind of weird, but it's your uncle cousin, not sister wives, but uncle cousin. So anyway, he lives in Laban's house. He goes through all that. He ends up with 2 wives and 11 sons from the 2 wives and their 2 servants. And then he decides to run for his life, and then they have this confrontation, and he's headed on his way back home. And this is where we pick up the story in Genesis 32. So now, Genesis 31 ends like this. Early the next morning, Laban kissed his grandchildren and his daughters and blessed them, and then he left and he returned home. So that's in our rearview mirror. Now Jacob is pointed, him and all of his family and all of his household are pointed in the direction of home, Canaan. So what's coming? Well, he sends a messenger to go let Esau know that he's headed on his way home. Messenger comes back and says, Esau is looking forward to you coming home. He's headed this way with 400 men. Yay. So you've been gone for 20 years from home. And the last time you left your brother, he was mad. Mad enough that he wanted to kill you. And now he's coming to meet you with 400 men. Here's the thing. They say time heals all wounds. That's not true. So Jacob is scared for his life. So what does he do? He's like, all right, separate off part of my herd, and I'm going to send them with servants as gifts, and we're going to send sheep with one guy ahead, and then we're going to send goats with another guy behind that one. Then we're going to send camels with another guy behind that one. We're going to send cows and bulls with another guy behind that one, and then some extra people behind them. There's a gap between each of them, and he sends them off, and he says, let them know, if when you run into Esau, he tells them all the same thing. Hey, when you see Esau, tell them you are a servant, that you're there, that all the things that you have are a gift for him, and that I'm coming behind you. What is he doing? He is like putting as much buffer between him and these 400 men as possible. Well, if that servant dies, I can get out of here with my household at least. Well, if that servant and that servant died, I can still get out of here with my household. And then he realizes Esau doesn't want any of those things. And so he organizes his family. He sends, if you're going to organize your family, if you're Jacob, you're going to organize your family for self-preservation, how are you going to do this? You're going to send your least favorite out first. So he gets Leah and all of her household and all of her boys, and she's like, you go on ahead. And you might say, well, that's where they're the oldest, so they're going to be the strongest and the most capable. Also, they're going to slow down those 400 men the most so that you can run with Joseph and Rachel and that household and get out of here. And while you guys are going, I'm gonna remain back here. I'm good. I'm the lineage. I'm the most important. So I'm going to be the furthest from danger. Yes, this is what's happening. There's no real good explanation for this except for there's a lot of selfish motivation here. And then Esau sees him from far off, and he runs to him, and he hugs him and greets him with a kiss, and they weep together because they have been gone for so long. And it's like this reconciliation. Yeah? And Esau asks him, what's the point of all that stuff you sent ahead of you? Oh, it's a gift for you. I've been favored. I want it to be, I want to give it to you. And he's like, yeah, I'm just, yeah. He's like, I'm skinny and blessed. Anyway, No, he's like, I'm blessed, and I'm coming back into your space, into your place, and I want to give it to you as a peace offering. He's like, I don't need any of that stuff. You keep it. I've got more than enough. You keep it. It's yours. And Jacob's like, no, you take it so that I have a clean conscience here. At least I've paid my part for this peace offering. Maybe there can be peace between us because I've given up this stuff. And he's like, no. He's like, no, take it. And so Esau takes it. He's like, well, who are all these people who are with you? This is my household. These are the people who are here with me. This is how God has blessed me with all of these people. He's like, I left with nothing, and matter of fact, he prays this to God. He prays to God to protect him from his brother, and he says, I came here with nothing but a shepherd's staff. Like, okay, drama queen, you left your household with more than that, but okay, just me and my staff. And now I have 2 households, which, just as a point of reference, sister wives, 2 households doesn't work. It only creates conflict. There's nothing good that happens from having 2 households. Anyway, so here he is, and Esau's like, well, let me take care of you. Let me leave some men here with you, and let's head back to my place. And he's like, no, you go ahead. We'll be right behind you. And he says, no. Let me at least leave servants with you that they can help you with this. He's like, now listen, you go ahead, and I've got all these kids, and I've got these animals, and if the animals are driven too hard even for a day, they're going to die. And if the kids are not taken care of for even a day, they're going to die. What kind of excuse is this? Kids are pretty tough. These kids are not. And so he's like, no, you go, and I'll be right behind you. Does Jacob go to where Esau is? We're in chapter 33. No, because, okay, so verse 13, but Jacob said to him, my Lord knows that the children are tender and that I must care for the ewes and cows that are nursing their young. If they are driven hard just one day, all the animals will die. So let my Lord go on ahead of his servant while I move along slowly at the pace of the droves before me and that of the children until I come to my Lord in Seir. It's where they are. That's where Esau's house is, in Seir. Verse 16, so that day Esau started on his way back to Seir. Jacob, however, went to Succoth, where he built a place for himself and made shelters for his livestock. That is why the place is called Succoth. He didn't even go to the same place. He's still scared of his brother. He won't even go to his brother's house. He's like, no, you go on ahead. I'll be right there. Except for brother goes on to Seir into the hill country, and Jacob takes a left turn and goes to Succoth and builds a house and builds a barn and builds pens for his livestock. And you're like, oh yeah, this is just temporary. Well, I have to build a corral. I can't have my animals without a corral. Without a corral 20 miles away. I mean, we can build a corral here. We already have it established. Something that is interesting to note at this point as well. Isaac's still alive. Isaac's still alive and isn't in either one of those 2 places. Isaac is still alive and not in either one of these places. It's crazy. So after Jacob came from Padan Aram, he arrived safely in the city of Shechem in Canaan, encamped within sight of the city, and for 100 pieces of silver he bought from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem. What? No. Bought. he bought from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, the plot of ground where he pitched his tent. There he set up an altar and called it El Elohi Israel. Oh, skipped over something. He sends his wife and kids ahead, and he finds himself sleeping overnight by himself. And in verse 22 of chapter 32, verse 22, that night Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 maidservants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions, so Jacob was left alone. And a man wrestled with him until daybreak. And when the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with men and have overcome." And Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask my name?" Then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." The sun rose above him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, the Israelites do not eat the tendon attached to the socket of the hip, because the socket of Jacob's hip was touched near the tendon. Who is Jacob wrestling with? Well, Jacob says God. Who is Jacob wrestling with? What does the author say? We always interpret this as a man, or he's wrestling with God. But the name Israel literally means overcomer of God, or conqueror of God, actually. Who's he wrestling with? I think this is an intriguing question. Well, who does the writer say that he's wrestling with? What does the Bible say? It says that he wrestled a man. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. Why is it called God? The Bible says it is a man. A man. He wrestled with a man. Say it again. I don't know if Satan can bless him, or if Satan has the ability to change it. Huh? Yeah, he says, "Bless me." The man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with men and have overcome." Now, does he say that because he has struggled with God physically, or because he has struggled with God emotionally and spiritually? Because, has he struggled with God in this whole time? I mean, if you read the beginning of chapter 32, he prays to God. It says in verse 8, it says, if Esau comes and attacks one group, that group that is left may escape. And then Jacob prayed, "O God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, 'Go back to your country and your relatives, and I will make you prosper.' I am unworthy of all the kindness and faithfulness that you have shown to your servant. I had only my staff when I crossed this Jordan, but now I have become 2 groups. Save me, I pray, from the hand of my brother Esau, for I'm afraid he will come and attack me, and also the mothers with their children." Then he says, "But you have said, Like, it's always a great idea to pray, to ask God for favor, and then to be like, but you said. If you don't know this, this is what they teach car dealerships. This is what they teach the salesmen. The salesmen are asking a whole bunch of stuff and asking for you to give them information so that when they're in negotiation for selling you the car, they're like, but you said. Now, I didn't make this up, but you said. It's a negotiation tactic. It's like pinning them down of, well, you said this was something that you were going to do. This is, I don't know if it's Dale Carnegie, but Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People. But this is how Jacob is negotiating with God. He's wrestling with God in his prayer, and then physically he's wrestling with the man. So, like, that is a great conversation to have. And it's a great thing for you to dive into the scripture and what would be a Haggah, a thoughtful review of what in the world is going on here. We're going to have a different what we call Haggah project to really stew over the word and think through what it is and exactly what's going on here in a different part here pretty soon. But Jacob is wrestling with somebody. It's a man. He's wrestling with his past. He's wrestling, and the question. The next question is, who won? So he definitely overcame, right? He says that he overcame. What did he win? If Jacob was the winner, what did he win? Well, he got a good limp. He got a new name. Literally translated means conquered God. And most people, a lot of biblical scholars, go ahead. I see a hand raised. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So here's my question. Who has power to change a person's name? Who has the authority to change Jacob's name? God. Like, a name is, and this is why Jacob on the backside says, well, I have seen God face to face and I didn't die. Is this God in the flesh? I would venture to say no. It's not. But it's significant what's going on. Correct. The angels of God showed up to him. Yeah. Told him to go home. Just interesting. Again, it's a question. And so we get this interesting dynamic because a lot of people look at Jacob and his name changed to Israel, and this is where it changes. And a lot of people will point to and say he wrestled with God, and the nature of Jacob changes to Israel here. I'm going to ask the question, did the nature of Jacob actually change once his name changed? So what is the next story? Well, the next story is his encounter with Esau. And then we get past the encounter with Esau and he settles down in Shechem. You remember the introduction that we had a few chapters earlier to Jacob's children? There was one that was really interesting and stuck out from all the rest. Do you remember who it was? Somebody had this son and this son and this son and was also the mother of Dinah. There was one girl. Was that the only daughter in Jacob's house? Not a chance. There's no way. But the only one listed. And here we go. In chapter 34, here they are in Shechem. They've bought a plot of ground. Tent gets pitched. They call it. He set up an altar, called the place Elohi Israel, the God of Israel. Now here's a question I do have before we jump into this Dinah story. Does that strike you as odd, what that information about what Jacob just did? He pitched his tent. He built an altar. What's missing from that declaration? If you think back to Isaac and to Abram, not a sacrifice, but it could be a sacrifice. But what is it? When Abram, he did pitch a tent, it says he does. But when Abram got to Canaan, he pitched a tent, he made an altar, and did what? I didn't name it. He called on the name of the Lord. No. I'm saying Jacob is not the same. Every time Avram and Isaac found a place where they met God, they pitched their tents, they built an altar, and they called on the name of the Lord. Jacob has found his way back to this land, still scared of his brothers, purchased a property instead of staying in the land where his promise is. Purchased a property, pitched his tents, built an altar, named the altar, named the place, but never called on God. He never prayed and called on the name of the Lord. We're going to revisit that in just a second. Then we see Dinah. Dinah is the daughter of Jacob. She goes out to meet with other women in the land and check out the land. The son, which I think his name is Hamor, the Shechem, Shechem, son of Hamor, the Hivite, saw her. He took her, forced himself on her. He raped her without her consent. And after he had slept with her, said, "Hey, Dad, I want her to be my wife." Okay, kind of out of order. They found out what was going on. Jacob heard about it. Didn't say anything because his sons were all still out in the field. Sons come back. Hamor comes. He says, "Hey, my son wants your daughter for a wife." The brothers have now all heard what had happened. And Jacob won't negotiate. So brothers say, "Hey, we'll negotiate with you. We'll take your daughters as our wives, and we will give our daughters and our sisters to be your wives, but we can't do it the way that you are. You have to be like us. You've got to be circumcised. All of you. The whole country. It is a lot of people. So Shechem's like, all right, I'll go start talking to people. I'll go start a petition. Here's the deal. They were lying. They had no interest in taking wives. It says they convinced them. All the men are circumcised on the third day while they're still sore, it says. They're recovering. They go and kill them all and get their sister and bring her home. I would say that the response of Jacob to this story is why he's not called Israel in this story. Because verse 30 of chapter 34 says, Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, You have brought trouble on me. Not you've brought trouble on our house. Not you've brought trouble on us, your brothers and your mothers and I. No. You have brought trouble on me by making me a stench to the Canaanites and the Perizzites, the people living in this land. We are few in number, and if they join forces against me and attack me, I and my household will be destroyed. He's talking to his sons. Simeon and Levi are brothers of Dinah. Dinah is a daughter of Leah. The oldest of Leah's kids is Reuben. He's the Behor for Jacob. He's going to be looked over the whole time. But it goes Reuben, Simeon, Levi. I believe Judah is the fourth born. He's the one who's going to end up being the leader. Still not going to be the Behor. Still not going to get the double portion. We're going to get to that later. Jacob's character hasn't changed. He is still completely focused on how this affects him. He's still solely focused. He wrestled with God and lived, and God changed his name. Still selfish and self-centered, and it's all about him. How long will it take for this character? He's got 11 boys. And evidently only one girl, because this is what happens. It's not true. He has more girls than that. But and then verse 31, they replied, Should he have treated our sister like a prostitute? Well, obviously not. But there's no response. That's the end of the conversation. Jacob does not reply to them. He doesn't give them any response. He's still solely concerned about him. And in the opening of chapter 35, it's so interesting how God works. Because you still struggle with, he wrestled with God. And he wants to make this declaration. I wrestled with God. I saw him face to face. And I survived. But he survived seeing God face to face only to continue acting like he did before he met God. Face to face. Sounds pretty familiar, doesn't it? Like, what does it take to change? What is it going to take to get this wrestler, this heel holder, to change? Well, I'll tell you what it takes. chapter 35. Then God said to Jacob, "Go up to Bethel and settle there." Do you remember where Bethel is? Not in Redding, California, no. Bethel is where he first met God. He was running from his brother toward Laban's house, and he stops to sleep, and he sleeps on a rock, and there he sees this ladder, right? Jacob's ladder is what it's called. That God was in that place, and he had no idea, and he built an altar there. God says, go back to that place, and here's the deal. Bethel's back in the land of Canaan. He said, go home. Go back to the place where you first met me on your own. Pretty significant, I think. He says, and build an altar there to God who appeared to you when you were fleeing from your brother Esau. And here is a crazy statement that Jacob's going to make that I think puts a lot of stuff in perspective. Because you remember the statement that Abraham made to his chief servant when he sent him to go get a bride for Isaac? He said, my son's not going there. So Jacob said to his household and to all who were with him, get rid of the foreign gods you have with you, and purify yourselves and change your clothes. Jacob was aware that there were foreign gods still in his house. He's listening to God and going in the direction of God's instruction, but he won't purify his own house and kick out the idols that he knows are there. Remember, there was a conversation between Laban and he. Laban chased him down because he was missing the gods of his household, right? What did he tell Laban when that confrontation happened? If you find it, we'll kill whoever has it. That they're as good as dead. Okay. Get rid of your foreign gods. Purify yourself. Then come, or change your clothes. Then come, let us go up to Bethel, where I will build an altar to God who answered me in the day of my distress and who has been with me wherever I have gone. So they gave Jacob all the foreign gods they had and the rings in their ears, and Jacob buried them under the oak at Shechem. Then they set out, and the terror of God fell upon the towns all around them, so that no one pursued them. Jacob and all the people with him came to Luz, that is Bethel, in the land of Canaan. There he built an altar, and he called the place El Bethel, because it was there that God revealed himself to him when he was fleeing from his brother. Now Deborah, Rebekah's nurse, died and was buried under the oak below Bethel. So it was named Allon Bekoth. Pitched his tent, built another altar, still hasn't called on the name of the Lord. After Jacob returned from Paddan Aram, God appeared to him again and blessed him. And this is crazy. God said to him, your name is Jacob, but you will no longer be called Jacob. Your name will be Israel. So he named him Israel. Didn't this already happen? Huh? Yeah, so after the wrestling match, it happens. And then finally, Jacob puts away the foreign gods. And God meets with him again. He says, I am calling your name Israel. says it twice. After Jacob returned, he says, your name is Jacob, but you will no longer be called Jacob. Your name will be Israel. So he named him Israel. What was Jacob's response? Uh-huh. Because what happens in verse 11? And God said, God doesn't continue to talk. God talks again. Like, remember this. It doesn't say, like, in a conversation, again, I'm going to go back to this. When you're reading Hebrew literature, and a person makes a statement that is a closed statement, and then there is, and they said, the same person talks again, there is a break in that conversation. And so, then he goes on, and God said to him, I am God Almighty. Be fruitful and increase in number. A nation and a community of nations will come from you. The kings will come from your body. The land I gave to Abraham and Isaac, I also give to you. And I will give this land to your descendants after you. Then God went up from him at the place where he had talked with him. And Jacob set up a stone pillar at that place where God had talked with him, and he poured out a drink offering on it. He also poured oil on it. Jacob called the place where God had talked with him Bethel. Yeah. So, God's now changed Jacob's name twice. And the second time God changes Jacob's name, he goes on to command him to do what? Be fruitful and multiply. What should we expect next? That he has more kids? Build an altar and call on God? That's exactly what Noah did, right? What else should we expect? Some type of tragedy. So here we go. Then they moved on from Bethel, and while there was still some distance from Ephrath, Rachel began to give birth and had great difficulty. And as she was having great difficulty in childbirth, the midwife said to her, don't be afraid, for you have another son. And as she breathed her last, for she was dying, she named her son Ben-Onai, which means son of my trouble or son of my sorrow. But his father, Jacob, named him Benjamin, which means son of my favorite. So Rachel died and was buried on that way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. Over her tomb, Jacob set up a pillar, and to this day that pillar marks Rachel's tomb. Israel moved on again and pitched his tent beyond Migdal Eder. While Israel was living in that region, Reuben went in and slept with his father's concubine Bilhah, and Israel heard of it. This is a really hard spot because this is the point where Jacob changes. From the loss of Rachel, Israel refuses to leave Canaan again. He becomes very heartbroken, very extremely even resistant to anybody else's influence or direction, even God's. From this point on, Jacob is a hurt and broken, beat down man. Who's distrusting and frustrated. And if you fast forward to Genesis, I think it's 48, 49, when Jacob is on his way to Egypt, he tells Joseph that he's responsible for the death of Rachel. He takes that responsibility on himself. Which, had he known that she was the one who took the gods, you think he'd ever have said, whoever has him, kill him? Not a chance. Well, they got buried, but he takes the responsibility. Like, he carries that guilt and that hurt and that pain. And here's the crazy part as we wrap this up this week. The name Israel means God conquered God. But in the Hebrew, you can flip those things. And you can inverse them and say Israel means God conquered. Jacob's nature and his approach to people didn't change until God finally broke him. See, he wrestled with God. He wrestled with the man and refused to give up. And God saw it as an endearing quality and said, you've got this chutzpah, you've got this fight, you've got this relentless pursuit of more, and I can use that. And God blessed it. But the thing is, when we trust in our ability to fight, and it doesn't break down and allow God to be the conqueror, and God to be in charge, and it to be God's mission, it can be way too late before we finally live out the mission and purpose that God has given us. See, God put before Jacob this opportunity not just to be a wrestler and a heel holder and a grappler, but God set before him this blessing, this opportunity to be blessed. And he changed his name to this man who wrestled with God and he overcame. But God's intention is never for man to overcome him and to be greater than him. It is for us to continue to wrestle and continue to fight and refuse to give up and allow God to lead us in the direction that we're supposed to go. See, Jacob's destruction of Jacob and Jacob's family was because of Jacob's decisions, not because of God's. And this is a lesson that we have to learn. That as we follow God, He wants to take us back to the place where we first met Him. And He wants to speak over us and lead us from that place to have everything that we need. The challenge is we want to wrestle and fight with God and try to mold God to do what we want Him to do. But that's not where the blessing of God comes from. The blessing of God comes from allowing Him to lead and us not losing our fight, not losing our will to fight. Does that make sense? So we're going to take some time from here, and we're going to have some more discussion about this. Um, if you're watching online, you really should come and join us in person. It is quite a good discussion. On the backside of this, we're going to discuss quite a few things and talk about some stuff we didn't cover. Looking forward to it. Come and join us on Sunday mornings at 10:30 ish, and we'll see you then.